Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for February 17th, 2026. On February 17th in 1869, the University of Nebraska was officially chartered. Fun fact, their football stadium holds over 85,000 people, which means on game day, it becomes the third largest city in Nebraska. That's pretty impressive to me. Today in our recap, we're diving into some challenges from the Old Testament laws. We watch Jesus clash with the religious leaders over the Sabbath, and we get some wisdom about guarding our life. So let's jump into it. So in Exodus 21 and 22 today, Israel is camped at Mount Sinai. They have already received the Ten Commandments, and now God is giving them detailed civil and criminal laws. These are sometimes called the Book of the Covenant, and they govern everything from poverty rights to personal inquiry to social responsibility. Now, if you're reading these chapters for the first time, you might be thinking, wait, what? The Bible regulates slavery? An eye for an eye? These laws seem kind of, harsh to put it lightly. So let's address some of these questions head on. The first question is, why does God give laws about slavery instead of just abolishing it? Slavery in ancient Israel is way, way different than all of these surrounding countries, as well as slavery that we tend to think about when we think about slavery in the 17, 1800s during the African slave trade. These are very, very different things. In ancient Israel, slavery really had nothing to do with race at all. It had everything to do with economics. Here's an example for you. Say you went to a restaurant and you ordered dinner. Then you ate your dinner. Okay. And then after your dinner was over, you realized that you left your wallet at home and you had no way to pay for your meal. So the owner of the restaurant comes out and says, okay, I understand you can't pay me. Why don't you go in the back and wash some dishes for an hour? And then once you wash dishes for an hour, you will have paid back your debt and you're good to go. We would all find that to be a reasonable transaction. Well, that's what slavery was in ancient Israel. Slavery was simply an economic exchange to help to pay your debt. You work your debt off. What God is doing here is actually radically regulating the existence of this institution to protect people. Hebrew servants were to be released after 6 years. They couldn't be treated brutally. And, for example, there's some specific passage here that says if a master strikes a servant and knocks out their tooth or their eye, that person is just freed immediately. This is obviously much, much different than what we've come to know the slave trade, say, in the early Americas, or even the countries that existed around Israel at this time. What God is setting up with his people here is far, far different. Really, you can't even compare the two. It's just a bummer that we use the same word to describe either scenario, slave. It's really unfortunate. But the reality is that these rules are set in place to protect people, not to put chains on them. Second question here is, what's this eye for an eye principle? Is this just promoting revenge? Actually, no. This is also called lex talionis, and it was really revolutionary for the time period. In ancient cultures, if somebody hurt your family, like harmed a family member, you might just go and wipe out their entire clan. This law here limits retribution to the punishment must fits the crime model more than just you hurt me once, I 10x it. It's a proportional justice system. It's not escalating violence. Later on, Jesus actually takes this even further and teaches that we don't even need to retaliate at all because the vengeance is for the Lord. And this law here starts to build that foundation. Another question you might have is that some of these laws seem to treat women poorly, like treating them as property. So, what the heck is going on here? This is where we need to understand the cultural context. In the ancient world, women had almost no legal standing or economic power whatsoever. These laws actually protect women by establishing their rights and requiring compensation or care if they are wronged. We need to understand how revolutionary this is. There was no culture on earth that gave these type of rights to women. Israel really is the first culture that gives these type of rights to women. And the reality here too is that these laws for women would not even be necessary at all if people would just follow God and follow the commandments to begin with. But God knows that men's hearts can drift very, very easily. So these extra laws here are put into place to protect women even further. The laws about ox goring people might seem kind of random, but they're actually teaching us something about responsibility. If your ox or animal has a history of being dangerous and you don't contain it and it kills someone, then you're liable. We're being taught here that it's about taking seriously our responsibilities for our property and how it affects others. Chapter 22 covers theft, property damage, and social responsibility. There are laws about returning lost property, not taking advantage of widows and orphans, and lending money without interest to the poor. The underlying principle is quite clear. God cares about justice, especially for the vulnerable. And you see the same idea over and over again when Jesus is preaching in the first century. And here's something that we need to understand about these laws. These laws were never meant to be this eternal moral absolutes for all time and for all people. These laws were very specific to ancient Israel's theocracy. But they also reveal God's character, and he values human life, he protects the weak, and he demands justice. And he cares about how his people treat others. That's the major takeaway here. Are moving on to the New Testament, we're finishing up chapter 2 of Mark and jumping into chapter 3 a bit. Setting the scene first, Jesus is gaining popularity in Galilee. He's teaching, healing, casting out demons, and calling disciples. The religious establishment is starting to pay pretty close attention to him, and they don't like what they see. In chapter 2, people ask Jesus why his disciples don't fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do. When they're saying John here, they're not talking about Jesus' disciple John, they're talking about John the Baptist, who had his own set of disciples. Jesus responds with this wedding metaphor. He says, you don't fast at a wedding when the bridegroom is present. He's basically saying, I'm here, this is the celebration. There's no time for mourning now. There's going to be plenty of time for that later. But for now, we're not going to mourn. We're not going to fast. Then he tells them, you don't patch an old cloth with new cloth, or do you put new wine in an old wineskin? So the question here is, what is he talking about? He's saying that he is bringing the kingdom of God, and it can't just be patched onto an old religious system. This is not an upgrade to Judaism, it's something fundamentally new. The old structures cannot contain it. Next, Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields on the Sabbath, and the disciples pluck some heads of grain to eat. The Pharisees call them out. That's work, and work is forbidden on the Sabbath. Jesus then reminds them that David once ate consecrated bread when he was hungry, and then he makes this crucial statement. He says, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. So the question here that everyone asks is, why is Jesus breaking the Sabbath? But the truth is, he actually is not breaking the Sabbath. The Pharisees and religious leaders built 39 categories of prohibited work with hundreds of subcategories. What the religious leaders are doing is they know what the law is, and they want people to be so far away from breaking the law that they're going to build a fence or build a trench around the law. So by picking these grains on the Sabbath, it was not breaking God's law, not in the slightest. It was breaking the traditions of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And Jesus is saying that you've missed the point. The Sabbath is a gift of rest, not a burden of regulations. Chapter 3 does escalate a bit. Jesus is in the synagogue and there's a man with a shriveled hand. The Pharisees are watching to see if Jesus will heal on the Sabbath so they can accuse him. Jesus knows what they're thinking and he asks them point blank, is it lawful to do on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save a life or to kill? They don't answer because that answer would trap them. Jesus is angry and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He heals the man anyway, and immediately the Pharisees start plotting with the Herodians, their political enemies, to kill Jesus. That's how threatened they feel. All right, we're jumping now into Proverbs. We read Proverbs 5, verses 1 through 14. This passage describes the adulteress with smooth words and lips that drip with honey. In other words, seduction is attractive and persuasive, but the end result is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword, and it leads to death. So, a question here is, why is there so much emphasis on sexual purity in Scripture, particularly in Proverbs? Well, because sexuality is powerful. I think we can all agree with that. It bonds people physically, emotionally, and spiritually. When it's used outside of God's design, which is within the context of marriage, it causes deep damage. Solomon isn't being prudish here, if you will. He's being realistic. These are the rewards you reap if you choose to act out sexually. Alrighty, now a quick word from our sponsor, and this show is sponsored by Covenant Security Equipment, which is a Christian-owned company that partners with building contractors who build with safety in mind. They sell bullet-resistant windows, secure transaction systems, drive-through installations, and much, much more. If this is of interest to you, go to covenantsecurityequipment.com. Also, don't forget to pick up a copy of the Learn the Bible in a Year workbook. I did write this book for you, and it does have additional questions and fun facts about our daily readings. The digital version of this book is 100% for free. You can also pick up the paperback version, which is the version that I prefer. The link to both of those are in the show notes, so go ahead and check that out. So, what was your main takeaway from today's reading? My main takeaway was Jesus's actions in front of the Pharisees. I think the Hollywood version of Jesus is that he's this guy that came and he was really peaceful and meek and he didn't really ruffle any feathers. But as we see here, that's not true at all. Jesus is standing up for what is right, and it's definitely, definitely ruffling feathers. It would be much more easy for Jesus just to not eat grain on the Sabbath or not heal somebody on the Sabbath. That way, he wouldn't make anybody upset. The problem with doing that is that that would be outside of his own conviction. He came to save people, and he doesn't care if he's going to make people like the Pharisees and the Sadducees upset because what he's doing is right. So, just a good reminder that we need to do what is right regardless of the circumstances. Alrighty, well, that is the recap for today, and I will see all of you cool cats again here tomorrow.